Ex-wife vanished while pregnant, leaving the millionaire stunned when he met her twins 7 years later. Los Angeles is a city that never sleeps, pulsing with ambition, dreams, and the promise of success. For Jack Reynolds, a tech mogul and CEO of Reynolds Enterprises, it was just another day in the office, meetings, strategies, and the relentless drive to expand his business empire. Jack, in his late 30s, had everything a man could want: wealth, fame, and power. But despite his success, he was still missing something: a personal connection, a love that could balance out the high-speed life he had built around him. It was a brisk autumn day when Jack first saw Sophia Anderson at the Tech Innovators Conference, one of the most prestigious events in Silicon Valley. Sophia wasn't in the spotlight. She wasn't the CEO of a startup, nor was she giving a keynote speech. Instead, she was quietly attending as a marketing assistant for a smaller tech firm, Innotech Solutions. She blended into the crowd, standing just off to the side of the stage as Jack spoke to a group of investors about his company's latest advancements. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders in soft waves, and her warm brown eyes caught Jack's attention in a way no other woman had in years. There was something different about her, something he couldn't quite place. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaos that surrounded him. She wasn't trying to make herself known, and that intrigued him. In a world where every woman seemed to want something from him, Sophia's quiet confidence was an enigma he was eager to solve. During a break, Jack found himself making his way toward her, drawn by an inexplicable urge to know more. He had his usual entourage of colleagues and investors, but they were all engaged in their own conversations, leaving him with the rare opportunity to approach someone without the usual pressure. "Hi, I don't think we've met," Jack began, offering a polite smile. "I'm Jack Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Enterprises." Sophia looked up, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of curiosity and reserved interest. "Sophia Anderson. I work with Innotech Solutions," she replied with a soft smile, her voice steady but not overly warm. There was no starstruck admiration in her tone, no attempt to impress him with her knowledge of his company or his wealth. She spoke as though they were equals, and for some reason that made Jack want to know more. "I've heard of Innotech," Jack said, trying to sound casual. "You've been doing some great things in the AI space. I'm actually a huge fan of your work with smart homes." Sophia's eyes lit up for a moment, a flash of pride crossing her face. "Thank you. We've been working on some new integrations that I think could change the way people interact with their homes. It's been an exciting project." Jack nodded, genuinely interested. The way she spoke about her work, the passion in her voice, it was evident that she wasn't just there to network or climb the corporate ladder. She cared deeply about what she did. That was a rarity in his world, where so many people seemed to be driven solely by status and the next big paycheck. They talked for what seemed like hours about technology, about the future, about their shared love for innovation. Jack found himself captivated by her intelligence, her authenticity. It wasn't long before the conversation turned personal. "I've never been the type to throw myself into the spotlight," Sophia confessed, as the conversation naturally veered toward their lives outside of work. "I don't really care for the glitz and glamour. I'd rather be doing something meaningful, something that makes a difference." Jack smiled, impressed by her humility. It was clear that she wasn't here to use her connections or seek out the next big opportunity. She wasn't dazzled by the idea of being with someone like him, and that, more than anything, made Jack feel a magnetic pull toward her. "Same here," he said, his voice lowering slightly. "I think a lot of people get caught up in all the noise, fame, fortune, power, and forget what really matters." Sophia raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And what matters to you?" Jack paused, thinking for a moment. It was rare for him to reflect like this, but in her presence he felt like he could open up in a way he never had before. "I guess connection. Real, genuine connections with people who are actually interested in you, not what you can do for them." Sophia smiled softly, nodding. "I understand that." It's hard to find people who don't want something from you, Jack chuckled, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. Exactly. So, what's your story, Sophia? What brought you into the tech world? She hesitated for a moment, then shared her journey, a story of ambition, late nights spent studying, and the determination to prove herself in a field dominated by men. It wasn't a sob story or a tale of struggle. It was a reflection of a woman who had worked hard to get where she was, but who also wasn't willing to compromise her values for success. As the day went on, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he had found someone who truly understood him, someone who wasn't caught up in the superficiality of his world. It wasn't long before they exchanged numbers, and Jack found himself eagerly awaiting the next time they could talk, knowing that something had shifted, something he wasn't ready to admit yet, but that he couldn't ignore. What started as a casual conversation at a tech conference soon blossomed into something deeper, though neither of them could have predicted the path it would lead them down. As they parted ways that evening, Jack watched Sophia disappear into the crowd, already feeling a sense of loss. He knew he would see her again, but he couldn't shake the thought. This could be the start of something unforgettable. Over the next few weeks, Jack couldn't shake the memory of his conversation with Sophia. Their encounters, which started as casual exchanges during business meetings and tech events, gradually turned into something more. They began to text each other in the evenings, discussing everything from business strategies to personal interests. Jack was captivated by how easy it was to talk to her, how naturally their conversations flowed. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was constantly performing or trying to impress someone. With Sophia, he was just Jack, and that was enough. Sophia, too, found herself drawn to Jack. Though she was careful not to show it, she felt something stirring inside her that she hadn't experienced in a long time, something that resembled trust, hope, and a connection she didn't want to admit to herself. She found herself looking forward to their calls, feeling a warm excitement each time his name flashed on her phone. But as much as she enjoyed their blossoming friendship, there was an undeniable fear that lingered in the back of her mind. Sophia had a secret, one that she had been hiding from everyone, including herself. She was pregnant. The news had come as a surprise. At first it seemed like an unthinkable scenario. She had just started to get her life together, balancing work and her growing ambitions. The pregnancy wasn't planned, but it wasn't something she could ignore. The doctor confirmed it. She was about 8 weeks along, and though she hadn't felt the need to tell anyone yet, her body was starting to change. It became harder and harder to hide the truth. The hardest part was knowing that Jack, the man who she had started to care for, would never be a part of this new chapter in her life. They were from two different worlds. He, a successful tech billionaire, constantly surrounded by people, projects, and media attention. She, a quietly ambitious woman who had built her career on her own terms, far from the spotlight. The idea of bringing a child into their complicated and very public relationship made her heart ache. Jack was used to attention. The press adored him. The investors called him a genius. He was constantly in the public eye, and Sophia couldn't help but feel that she would never fit into that world. She didn't want Jack's life, filled with parties and photo shoots and the constant pressure to be perfect. She wanted something simpler, something real, something that only she could offer to the child growing inside her. She had always prided herself on her independence. She had worked hard to build her career, never asking anyone for help, always standing on her own 2 feet. But now, with a child on the way, the stakes were higher. She couldn't be the woman Jack needed, the woman who could fit into his glamorous world of endless meetings and business dinners. She knew deep down that she would always be second in his life to his ambitions, and she didn't want to raise a child in that environment. She didn't want her child to grow up in a world where fame and money mattered more than the simple moments of love and connection. For weeks, Sophia wrestled with her emotions. She tried to convince herself that she could tell Jack, but the fear of rejection, of him seeing her as a liability, kept her from doing so. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was just one of many in his life, a fleeting connection that wouldn't last. It was the fear of losing her independence and identity that ultimately drove her to make the hardest decision of her life. She would disappear. Sophia packed her bags and left Los Angeles without a word to Jack. She rented a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Northern California, far away from the bustle of the city. She changed her name to Emma Carter, a nod to her new life, and kept a low profile, focusing all her energy on her pregnancy and preparing for the future. She didn't tell Jack where she was going, didn't even send him a text. She simply disappeared, leaving behind the man who had opened a door to a life she wasn't ready for. As the months passed, Sophia, now Emma, embraced her new life. She enrolled in online courses to further her education, quietly building a foundation for her future. When Oliver was born, she felt a sense of peace that she hadn't known before. Her son was healthy, strong, and everything she had hoped for. A few years later, Ella came into the world, a vibrant, curious girl with the same bright eyes as her brother. Life wasn't easy, but it was simple. Emma worked hard to provide for her children and make a life for them that she could be proud of. She didn't miss the luxury of her old life, the world she had left behind. She had made the choice, and now, in her small apartment with her 2 children, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. But no matter how much she tried to distance herself from her past, Jack's shadow loomed large in her mind. She had never stopped caring about him, never stopped wondering if, in another life, things could have been different. There were days when she missed him terribly. The late-night phone calls, the laughter, the feeling that someone truly understood her. But every time she thought about reaching out, she reminded herself why she had left. Because she couldn't be part of his world, and she wouldn't raise her children in a world where they were secondary to his ambitions. As the years went by, Emma and Jack both built new lives. But in the deepest corners of their hearts, there was always a thread that connected them, one that neither of them could sever completely. And that thread, 7 years later, was about to pull them back together in the most unexpected of ways. 7 years had passed since Jack Reynolds last saw Sophia Anderson. The memories of their brief but intense connection had lingered in the back of his mind, like a song that played in the distance but couldn't quite be recalled. He had moved on, of course he had to. His business empire had grown exponentially, and with it, the demands on his time and attention. He had casual relationships, but none of them ever reached the depth he had once shared with Sophia. Something about her had felt different, special, but he couldn't quite place his finger on it. When he received an invitation to a lavish gala hosted by Reynolds Enterprises, Jack saw it as a chance to unwind. It was a charity event, celebrating the company's recent philanthropic efforts, and he wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. His life, however, had a way of surprising him when he least expected it. The venue was a grand ballroom in downtown Los Angeles, elegantly decorated with crystal chandeliers and velvet drapes. It was the kind of event where high-powered people mingled over cocktails and business deals were struck in hushed tones. Jack arrived in a tailored suit, his ever-present charisma cutting through the crowd as he shook hands with investors, employees, and fellow tech moguls. As the evening wore on, Jack made his way to a quieter corner of the room, hoping to escape the social whirlwind for a few minutes. He stepped onto the balcony, breathing in the cool night air. The city sprawled before him, a sea of lights that never seemed to dim, but his moment of peace was short-lived. As he turned to head back inside, he spotted a woman standing by the edge of the crowd, her face partially hidden by the shadows. At first, he didn't recognize her, but then his heart skipped a beat. Sophia. No, Emma. It took him a moment to process it. The woman before him was older, more refined, but there was no mistaking those eyes, the same warm, intelligent eyes that had once captivated him. She was standing with 2 children beside her, a boy and a girl, both of whom looked up at her with adoration. Sophia, or Emma, looked different now. Her once soft and reserved presence had evolved into someone more self-assured, more confident. She held herself with a quiet strength that was impossible to ignore. Jack's breath caught in his throat as memories from their time together flooded back. "Emma," Jack called out, his voice tentative. She turned, her face instantly betraying a flicker of recognition. For a split second, their eyes locked, and Jack felt a rush of emotions. There was so much he wanted to say, so much he needed to know, but all of it was tangled up in a moment of confusion and disbelief. "Jack," she replied quietly, her voice steady but cautious. She took a small step back, as though preparing to distance herself from the moment. He approached her slowly, his mind racing. "I didn't expect to see you here. I mean, after all this time, I didn't think." His words faltered. He had no idea how to start this conversation, how to begin to unravel the years of unanswered questions. Emma, or Sophia, looked at him with a mix of apprehension and restraint. "I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again," she said, her tone a little softer than it had been when they first met. "I thought it was better this way." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. "Better? You disappeared without a word. I didn't understand. Why? Why didn't you tell me where you were? Why didn't you?" She cut him off gently, her eyes focused on her children, who were now looking up at Jack with curiosity. "I had my reasons, Jack, and they're not ones I wanted to explain to you back then. I thought it was for the best." Jack's mind whirled. "But what do you mean, Emma? You just left." "I thought we had something real. I thought you did have something real," she interrupted, her voice growing more firm. "But things change. Life changes. And sometimes you have to make decisions that don't make sense to anyone else. That's what I did." Jack stood there, dumbfounded. He couldn't take his eyes off the two children at her side. They had her eyes, her features. He could see the resemblance immediately. "Are these—" He trailed off, struggling to find the words. "Are these your children?" Sophia hesitated for a long moment before finally nodding. "Yes, Oliver and Ella." Jack blinked, the truth dawning on him with brutal clarity. He felt a knot tighten in his chest. "Wait, you're telling me these are mine?" Emma's gaze softened. "Yes, Oliver is yours. Ella too." She glanced down at the children, who were now standing patiently, holding hands and looking up at Jack. Her voice lowered, almost to a whisper. "I never wanted to keep them from you, Jack, but I didn't want them to grow up in a world where their father's ambition would always come first." The words hit Jack like a punch to the gut. His heart ached, the shock of the revelation flooding him in waves. For years he had wondered about her disappearance. He never expected it to be because of this. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jack asked, his voice raw with emotion. "Why keep them from me?" Sophia shook her head, her face unreadable. "I didn't know how to. And by the time I realized, it seemed too late." She paused, taking a deep breath. "But now they deserve to know who you are. They deserve the truth." Jack stood there, stunned and silent, the weight of the past 7 years settling heavily on his shoulders. He had so many questions, so many things left unsaid, but one thing was clear. Everything was about to change. The ballroom buzzed with chatter, but for Jack, the world had fallen silent. The realization that he had 2 children, Oliver and Ella, living lives he had never known about, hit him like a thunderclap. His thoughts raced as he tried to process what Emma had just told him. His heart ached with confusion and guilt, but somewhere beneath the shock there was an undeniable flicker of hope. This was his chance to reconnect, to make up for lost time. He turned to Emma, his mind whirling. I need to talk to you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to understand. Please, can we go somewhere private?" Emma hesitated, her gaze flickering toward her children. They were standing quietly nearby, still uncertain about the strange interaction taking place. Oliver's dark eyes were full of questions, while Ella held on to her brother's hand, sensing the tension in the air. "I'm not sure this is the right time, Jack," Emma said softly. "It's been so long, and I don't think we can just pick up where we left off. There's a lot more to this story than you realize." Jack felt his frustration building. "Emma, I've spent years wondering why you left without a word. I need answers. And more than that, I need to know them. I need to know you again, the woman I cared for. We can't just pretend like nothing happened." She sighed, a hint of weariness in her eyes. "You think it's easy for me, Jack, to come back into your world after everything, after what I've built with my children?" She looked down at them. "They're my life now. I can't just throw them into the chaos of your world. I can't let them be a part of that." Jack's heart ached at her words. He knew she wasn't wrong. His life had always been a whirlwind of work, events and pressure. But the thought of not being there for his children was unbearable. "I know I'm not perfect," Jack said, his voice quiet but firm. "But I want to be part of their lives. I want to be part of yours. I can change, Emma. I want to do this right." There was a long pause as Emma looked at him, considering his words carefully. The years of pain, the years of keeping her secret, all seemed to hang in the air between them. Finally, she nodded, though her expression remained guarded. "All right," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "We can talk, but we need to do this carefully. We can't rush things." Jack agreed, though his mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts. They walked to a quieter corner of the venue, away from the chaos of the gala. The weight of their conversation felt heavier in the silence that enveloped them. As they sat down, Emma looked at him with an intensity that Jack hadn't seen before. Her gaze was no longer soft or uncertain, but focused and determined. She wasn't the same woman he had known. She had been changed by motherhood, by the decisions she had made to protect her children. "Jack, I didn't want to come back into your life like this," Emma began, her voice steady. "I didn't want to bring all of this up. I thought I could protect them from the complications of a world like yours, one that's built on power, competition, and expectations." Jack leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "You're right. I've always put business first. But I've learned the hard way that it's not everything. If you'd just given me a chance to be there with you, to be part of this family, maybe things wouldn't have had to go the way they did." Emma shook her head, a bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. "You think I didn't want that? You think I didn't wish you could be there? But you were so focused on your empire, Jack. And I couldn't ask you to leave that for me. I couldn't ask you to change who you are, especially when I wasn't sure you even wanted to." Jack's chest tightened. It was the truth. He had been so consumed by ambition, by the drive to build something that would outlast him, that he had neglected the people who mattered most. He had lost track of what really mattered, and now the consequences of that were staring him in the face. "I didn't want to be the person who held you back, Jack," Emma continued. "I couldn't be the one to ask you to choose between me and your future." Jack reached out, his hand hovering just above hers. "You didn't have to ask. You should have known I would have chosen you if I'd known what I was missing. But you disappeared, and I was left in the dark. You didn't give me the chance to make it right." The raw emotion in Jack's voice caught Emma off guard. She hadn't expected him to react like this, hadn't expected him to take responsibility for the things that had gone wrong. But his sincerity made her heart ache. She had spent so many years burying her feelings, hiding the truth about their children, that hearing him speak so openly felt like a small, fragile bridge beginning to form between them. As they sat in silence, the weight of their conversation pressing down on them, Emma looked over at her children. They were still in the distance, playing near the entrance of the ballroom, blissfully unaware of the whirlwind their lives were about to face. "I need time," Emma said quietly, her voice filled with both hope and caution. "I don't know how this is going to work, but we'll take it one step at a time." Jack nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. "One step at a time," he repeated, and for the first time in a long while, Jack allowed himself to hope. There was a chance, small but real, that he could rebuild what had been broken. He was willing to fight for it. The following weeks were a blur for Jack. The gala had been only the beginning, a moment that had set in motion a chain of events he never could have anticipated. His initial excitement at reconnecting with Emma had been replaced with a deep sense of urgency. Every day he thought about Oliver and Ella, the children he never knew existed. He had spent years chasing business deals, climbing the corporate ladder, but now nothing seemed as important as learning about the two lives that were his own flesh and blood. He couldn't help but think of what he'd missed. The milestones he wasn't there for, the birthdays, the school plays, the moments where a father should have been there. The weight of his regrets sat heavy on his chest. Emma had agreed to meet with him again, but she had been cautious, rightfully so. Their first conversation had been an emotional one, but Emma was still hesitant to let him into her world fully. She had made it clear that, though she was willing to talk, she didn't know if Jack could truly fit into the life she had carefully built for her children. She had lived without him for so long, and now, with two young children who had no idea of their father's identity, she didn't want to disrupt their world with promises that couldn't be kept. Despite her reservations, Jack respected her boundaries. He wasn't trying to rush things. He knew that rebuilding trust would take time, especially after everything that had happened. But the more he saw Emma, the more he realized how deep his feelings for her still ran. He didn't want to just be a part of their lives as a distant figure. He wanted to be there for them, to show them that he was someone worth trusting. It wasn't long before Emma allowed Jack to spend time with her children, though she set strict boundaries. At first they met in public places, a park, a quiet cafe, anywhere that felt safe for her. She watched him closely, observing how he interacted with Oliver and Ella. And Jack tried with all his heart to make up for lost time. Oliver, at 7 years old, was curious but cautious. He would often look up at Jack with suspicion, unsure of what to make of this new man in his life. Ella, on the other hand, was more open, a bright, inquisitive child who had the uncanny ability to make Jack smile, even on the hardest days. She would ask him endless questions, curious about the world and eager to know everything about the father she had never met. As the days went by, Jack began to realize the immense bond he had with both of them, even though he was still getting to know them. Each small interaction, whether it was reading a book with Ella or kicking a soccer ball with Oliver, made him feel closer to the family he never knew he had. But he also felt the strain of the distance Emma had carefully created. He could see how protective she was, how guarded she had become over the years. One afternoon, as Jack sat with Emma in the park watching the children play, he decided to push the conversation further. "I want to be there for them, Emma," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on Ella as she ran after a butterfly. "I want to be a father to Oliver and Ella, not just in name, but in their lives. I know I've messed up, but I need you to give me a chance. Let me prove it to you." Emma's eyes softened, but the tension was still there. She turned to face him, her expression serious. "Jack, you don't understand. I've spent years keeping them safe from everything I knew about your world. It's not just about being there for them, it's about what you can give them, what they need. They need stability, Jack. They need consistency. And I can't let them get caught up in your ambitions, your plans." Jack's chest tightened at her words. He knew she was right. He had always prioritized work, had always put his company above everything else. But that was before he realized what he had been missing, before he understood how much more there was to life than business deals and boardrooms. "I know I can't promise you everything, Emma," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "But I can promise you that I'll put them first. I'll put you first. I'll be here every day to make sure they don't feel like they're alone." Emma's eyes flickered with uncertainty, as though she was considering his words for the first time. She had spent so many years building a life without Jack, without anyone else, that the idea of letting him in felt like a risk, one she wasn't sure she was ready to take. But there was something in Jack's tone, something in the way he said it, that made her feel as though he truly understood the stakes. "You say that now," Emma murmured, her gaze drifting toward the children, "but you haven't seen what it's like, what they've been through. I can't just hand them over to you, Jack, and hope it all works out." "I don't want to take them from you," Jack replied quickly. "I want to be part of their lives, but I won't force anything. I just want to be in the picture, even if it's just a small part of it. I want to help. I want to be the father they deserve." Emma's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, Jack saw a flicker of hope in her expression. She stood up, taking a deep breath as she walked toward the children. Jack followed her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Oliver, Ella," Emma called, her voice calm but firm. The children ran over to her, their faces lighting up with excitement. She knelt down to their level, and Jack stood quietly by her side. "There's someone I want you to meet," Emma said, her voice filled with an emotion Jack couldn't quite place. She turned to Jack, and for the first time she reached out her hand to him, her fingers brushing his as if signaling a tentative step forward. "This is your father," she said softly, her eyes locking with his. Oliver looked at Jack with a mix of confusion and curiosity, while Ella smiled, her innocence shining through. Jack's heart swelled, and in that moment he realized that no matter how long it took, he would do whatever it took to earn their trust and to become the father he had always been meant to be. Jack's world had changed in ways he couldn't have imagined when he first reconnected with Emma and learned about Oliver and Ella. Every step forward felt like progress, but it was a slow and painful journey, and Jack often found himself second-guessing his choices. He had spent years building an empire, but now, with his children in his life, he realized that the foundation of his success was crumbling. The urgency of balancing his business responsibilities with his growing family weighed heavily on him. The tensions between Jack and Emma were palpable. She was cautious, still unsure if his intentions were genuine or if he would return to his old ways once the excitement of reconnecting wore off. She had been burned once before, and trusting Jack again wasn't going to happen overnight, but Jack was determined. He was willing to prove himself, no matter the cost. However, Jack's business wasn't exactly cooperating. In fact, things were beginning to unravel. The company that he had worked tirelessly to build, Reynolds Enterprises, was facing serious financial challenges. There had been a sudden shift in the tech market, and the stock prices were plummeting. Jack had to make tough decisions. As the CEO, he couldn't afford distractions, especially not when so much was at stake. It was during this turbulent time that Emma sensed Jack pulling away. The long hours, the late nights, and the endless phone calls with investors, Jack had returned to his old self, consumed by his work. Emma, ever the protector, saw the shift in him and felt the distance growing between them. She didn't want to be the one to call him out, but it hurt to see him slipping back into the same pattern that had driven them apart in the first place. "I thought we were moving forward," she said one evening as they sat together in the living room of her modest home. "But it feels like you're just slipping back into the old ways, Jack. I don't know how much more I can take of this." Jack looked at her, the weight of his decisions pressing down on him. He had tried to balance everything, but now he was losing his grip. "I'm trying, Emma. I swear I am. This isn't easy for me either. I've spent my whole life building something, and now I'm at risk of losing it all." Emma sighed, her face softening with empathy. "I understand, but you've got to realize that you've already lost something precious. We've been through this before, Jack. You can't keep using work as an excuse. You've got to choose what really matters." Those words hit Jack harder than he expected. For the first time, he stopped and thought about what he had been sacrificing: his family, his children, the woman he loved. In the relentless pursuit of success, he had lost sight of what was truly important. The guilt that had been building inside him now felt like an anchor weighing him down. That night, Jack made a decision. He wasn't going to let his company dictate the rest of his life. He had already lost so much, and he wasn't going to lose Emma and the children as well. It was time for a change, a real change. He called a meeting with his board members the next morning and made a bold move. He stepped down as CEO of Reynolds Enterprises. The news shocked everyone. Jack had been the face of the company for years, and his resignation sent ripples through the tech world. But for Jack, it was a moment of liberation. He no longer needed to live up to the expectations of others. He needed to live for himself and his family. When he told Emma what he had done, she didn't know what to say. She was stunned by his decision, but deep down she could see that it was the right one. Jack was finally choosing them over his work, and she could feel the weight lifting from his shoulders. "You did it," Emma said softly, her voice filled with both awe and relief. "You actually did it." Jack smiled, though there was still a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. "I'm not sure what comes next, Emma, but I know I can't keep living the way I was. I want to be here for you, for Oliver and Ella." For the first time in a long while, Emma let her guard down. She reached out and took Jack's hand, a sign of both forgiveness and acceptance. "I believe you, Jack, but it's going to take time. We'll take it one day at a time, okay?" Jack nodded, grateful for her patience and understanding. He had a long road ahead of him, but for the first time, he felt like he was heading in the right direction. The following weeks were a mixture of personal growth and healing. Jack spent more time with his children, learning what it meant to be a father. He took Oliver and Ella to school, helped with their homework, and attended their soccer games. The bond between them grew stronger every day, and Jack was slowly but surely making up for lost time. There were bumps along the way, but the more time he spent with them, the more he realized how much he had missed. For Emma, seeing Jack so present in their children's lives brought a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. She watched him change before her eyes, not just for her, but for his children. She saw the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago, the man who was capable of making hard choices, who was finally prioritizing the things that mattered. But there was still one final obstacle standing in their way: Maximilian Thompson. Maximilian had been Jack's longtime business partner, but over the years their relationship had soured. Maximilian was a ruthless businessman, and when Jack stepped down from his position at Reynolds Enterprises, he saw it as an opportunity to seize control. He began to make moves behind Jack's back, attempting to destabilize the company further. Jack, however, was no longer the man who would sit idly by. He had changed, and with Emma and the kids behind him, he had the strength to fight back, not with the ambition that had once consumed him, but with a quiet, determined focus on what mattered. In a dramatic showdown, Jack confronted Maximilian in a boardroom meeting. But this time the stakes were different. It wasn't just about business, it was about securing a future for his family, one where they wouldn't have to live under the shadow of ruthless ambition. "Maximilian," Jack said, his voice calm but filled with conviction, "this company is no longer just mine. It's our future, and I'm not going to let you tear it down just for your own gain." Maximilian sneered, but Jack's words hit their mark. The tension in the room was palpable, but Jack stood tall, unwavering. For the first time, he wasn't fighting for himself. He was fighting for the life he wanted to build for his children, for Emma, and for a future that wasn't tainted by greed. In the end, Jack prevailed. Maximilian was forced out, and Jack reclaimed the leadership of Reynolds Enterprises, but this time, things were different. His priorities had shifted. His family came first. As Jack returned home that evening, he found Emma waiting for him with open arms. There were still challenges ahead, but they faced them together. Their journey wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and for the first time, Jack knew he had made the right choice. The story of ambition, redemption, and love had come full circle, and now it was time to embrace the future. The days that followed Jack's decision to step down as CEO were some of the most transformative of his life. There was no instant magic, no grand gesture that suddenly fixed everything. The road to healing was slow, filled with moments of doubt and frustration. But there was also an undeniable sense of purpose now, something he had never truly felt before. Jack's relationship with Emma deepened in ways that were once unimaginable. They had been through so much already, and yet here they were, starting fresh. Jack knew that earning her trust wasn't something that could be rushed. It would take time, effort, and most importantly, consistency. He had already made the choice to prioritize his family, and he was determined to prove to Emma and to himself that he could follow through. One quiet evening, as they sat in the cozy living room of Emma's home, Jack reached for her hand. It was a simple gesture, but one that meant more than words could express. She looked up at him, her eyes soft with understanding. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Jack said, his voice low. Emma nodded, her lips curling into a small, genuine smile. We have, but it's not just about how far we've come, Jack. It's about how far we're willing to go. Together, the weight of her words lingered in the air, and Jack knew she was right. This wasn't just about the past. It was about what they were building now. He had learned the hardest lesson of all, the value of connection, of being present, and of putting his family first. As for Oliver and Ella, they were thriving. The more Jack was involved in their lives, the more he saw how much they had grown, how much love they had to give, despite the years they had spent without him. Oliver had become more open, less wary of Jack's presence. Ella, with her boundless energy and sharp curiosity, had completely warmed to him. She loved to tell him about her day at school, her new favorite book, or the things she was learning in her science class. Jack couldn't get enough of these moments. But the true test of their bond came when they all went on their first family trip together, just the four of them. Emma had planned a short getaway to the coast, a place they could all unwind and enjoy each other's company without the distractions of work and responsibilities. It was there, by the ocean, that Jack truly realized how much he had missed out on. Every laugh, every shared meal, every conversation with his children felt like a new chapter unfolding. It was in those quiet moments, sitting around a campfire, watching the sun dip below the horizon, that Jack knew, without a doubt, that this was where he was meant to be. One evening, as they walked along the beach, Jack pulled Emma aside. The waves crashed softly against the shore, and the wind tousled her hair. She looked at him, her eyes questioning. "Emma," Jack began, his voice thick with emotion, "I've made so many mistakes in my life. But one thing I know for sure is that I don't want to waste another moment. I'm here. I'm with you, with Oliver and Ella. I'll always be here." Emma felt a surge of warmth in her chest. She had heard him speak before, but there was something in his tone this time, a sincerity, a clarity that made her believe him completely. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her own emotions. She had been hurt, she had been guarded, but now, standing here with Jack, with her family, she finally felt that she could let go of the past and embrace the future. "I believe you, Jack," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. "We're in this together, no matter what." Jack smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. He had found his place, not in the boardrooms of Reynolds Enterprises, but here, with the woman he loved and the children who had taught him what really mattered. The future no longer seemed like an endless race to success. It was about love, about family, and about the connections that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. Back at home, Jack didn't return to his old life as a high-powered CEO. He remained involved with Reynolds Enterprises, but now in a more balanced role. He didn't shy away from his responsibilities, but he made sure that his family came first. He found a new sense of purpose, not in the boardroom, but in the small, everyday moments that had once slipped past him unnoticed. The most significant change, though, was in his relationship with Emma. They had both been through so much, but now they stood side by side, stronger than ever. The walls they had each built around themselves had come down, brick by brick, replaced by trust, understanding, and the shared dream of a future together. One day, as they sat at the kitchen table with Oliver and Ella, their laughter echoing through the house, Jack realized that he had everything he had ever wanted, not in the form of wealth or business success, but in the form of a family, a real family. He had come full circle, and in that moment he knew he had found the true meaning of success. And so their story continued, not defined by ambition or money, but by the love they had for each other. The past was behind them, and the future stretched out before them, uncertain. Yes, but full of possibility. Together they would face whatever came next, knowing that as long as they had each other, nothing else truly mattered. As Jack finally embraces the life he had once ignored, he discovers that the real success isn't measured by the wealth he accumulated or the power he held, but by the love he found and the family he rebuilt. With every step he learned that it wasn't too late to make the right choices, to change the course of his life, and to build the future he always needed, not the one he thought he wanted. Through patience, humility, and a willingness to change, Jack built something far more valuable than any business empire. He built a family. And as he stood there, surrounded by the people who mattered most, he knew he had found his true purpose. If you enjoyed this story of redemption, love, and second chances, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss another incredible journey. There's always more to discover, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thanks for listening.